good morning, and a really warm welcome to everyone who's here in the room today. This is a really exciting day, and I'm really sorry that I can't be here all day. My name is Imre Leader. I'm Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education here at the university. It seems quite fitting that I should be here because I'm a child of the 1980s, and the moment I see that little cube in front of me, I get very excited. Many hours of my childhood was spent playing around with it, puzzling with it, finally getting used to how to solve it. I've completely forgotten, so if I pick it up again, I'm not going to make much progress. But I think this illustrates the power of play to stimulate the mind, how that enables us to then use those linkages between play and education. And it is such an important part of what we're trying to do. Obviously, we have experts in the room, and I'm going to be handing over shortly to one of them, who's going to take you through the session. But I just wanted to say that this is a sort of really important opportunity for us to think about ways that we can develop these ideas further, to think about what that means for cognition, for education, for the development of the human mind. I suppose there's no better time to be thinking about this as we kind of keep hearing about the advent of other forms of intelligence which are challenging human intelligence, and we keep repeating to ourselves what does make the human mind so different and so important for us to understand, and how can we continue to work on ways to stimulate that within the wider educational setting. So I'm here to thank everyone who's put this event together, to obviously, when he's here, thank Arno himself for what he did in terms of the millions and millions of people who benefited from his creativity and innovation, and for us to keep thinking about ways that we can take that forward in future work. I'm going to hand over to Paul Ramchandani. Paul's the Lego professor at the University of Cambridge. He knows much more about these issues than me, and he's rightfully going to be chairing this first session. So from my side, it's just a really great opportunity to welcome all of you here. I'm sorry I can't stay for the whole day. The kind of diary presses as always, but it's really lovely for me to be able to at least celebrate what's happening here and to welcome all of you to this event. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much for that welcome from the University of Cambridge, and welcome to you all. As Oscar said, I'm Paul Ramchandani. I work in the Faculty of Education, where I'm the Lego Professor of Play. We have a team, a research centre there that focuses on play and child development and education. And so this fits right in, and when Paul mentioned that this was going to be happening, was really excited, and there are treats throughout the day. But my job is to chair this first session. So the morning's in two parts. We've got a session now where I'm going to chair. We have 4 speakers speaking about puzzles and autism, and then there will be more discussion going on from that from about 11 o'clock onwards. So without further ado, because we've got a lot of speakers in a really packed programme, I'm going to introduce the first of our speakers. We've got 4 speakers talking about puzzles and autism, and it's really fitting to begin the day with that topic, to have Sir Simon Baron-Cohen, absolutely delighted, the head of the Autism Research Centre here at Cambridge, will be known, I'm sure, to all of you. So I'm not going to do long introductions to save time for everybody. I'm going to ask Simon to come and talk to us about his work on the pattern seekers. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much. Let's see where. Can you hear me okay? Good. So a great pleasure for me to be here. I'm going to be talking about the topic of my book called The Pattern Seekers. But just to preface it, some of us were here 10 years ago. I can see Tim in the audience. Many of the speakers you're going to meet today were here 10 years ago at the 40th anniversary of the invention of the Rubik Cube. So it's very exciting to be celebrating the 50th anniversary. I'm going to be arguing that there's a part of the human mind which engages in a psychological process which I call systemizing, which is how we understand systems. And systems follow rules, but they follow very specific rules called if and then rules. And the argument goes back to this logician, George Boole, in the 19th century. But the idea is a kind of understanding of logic in the mind, that if I take something and I do something to it, then I get a particular result, if and then. And this algorithm is something that I argue only humans look for in the world. It's a very special kind of pattern. We look for such patterns. We then confirm the pattern through repetition, trying to get evidence for it. But then we can start experimenting with the pattern. We can change the if, or we could change the and to get a different outcome. Engineers use the same kind of approach when they're trying to understand a system. They often talk about input, operation, and output. So the if, as I mentioned earlier, is really just the input, whatever you take. The operation is what you perform on that input, and then the output is what you observe. And notice here that you get a feedback, there's a feedback loop, which is very important. That's the repetition. You could go round and round, and we'll link this to autism shortly in terms of their love of repetition, to confirm that the pattern is true, or to change one of the variables to see what happens. So I've argued in my book that systemizing, understanding systems in this way, goes back at least 100,000 years. And I'm showing you an example of an invention from one of our ancestors 40,000 years ago, one of the earliest musical instruments that's ever been found, a flute made from a hollow bone from a bird. But you can see the algorithm at work in the mind of the inventor, that if I blow down the hollow bone, I get a particular sound. If I then cover one hole, I get a different sound. So it's if and then. And much more recently, only 12,000 years ago, when we think about inventions like the agricultural revolution, we can see the same algorithm in the human mind, if and then, at play, underlying, I argue, any human invention. If I take a tomato seed and I plant it in moist soil, then I get a tomato plant. And obviously, a simple but powerful invention like that transformed human society, human health, nutrition, and so forth. So let's bring it up to date, because we've got Max Park, who you're going to meet later today. Max is autistic. Max is also the world champion in the Rubik Cube. He's also the ambassador of the charity that we partner with, the Autism Centre of Excellence, and I'm pleased to see Tom here today, who's the chief exec. But Max has disabilities, otherwise why would he have that diagnosis? But autism is much more than just disabilities. In communication, for example, or social relationships, autism involves differences, and some of those differences are strengths. And I argue that when you perform the Rubik Cube, it's exactly the same algorithm, the if and then. So if you start with pattern A and you rotate the front three squares counterclockwise, you get pattern B. And you may hear from the mathematicians later today about permutations, and this is a finite system, but a remarkable mind can memorize many of these patterns, but it's the same approach. We're also going to be hearing from Derek Paravicini, who's also autistic. He's congenitally blind. He has a learning disability, but despite those disabilities, he's got remarkable differences and gifts. When he hears any song, a jazz song, just once, he can play it instantly. And if you ask him to change the key, he can transpose it very rapidly. Probably he's using the same if and then, unconsciously, algorithm that if he hears a particular riff and then transposes it, so performs an operation on it, say by a fifth, then he gets a new riff. And this is Daniel Tammet. Some of you know him because he talked recently in Cambridge. He's the European champion for memorizing pi, which he memorized the number pi to 22,400 decimal places. He's autistic. He also has synesthesia, or a mixing of the senses, but he can also perform mathematical calculations incredibly rapidly, taking 3-digit numbers and multiply them with another 3-digit number faster than a hand calculator. But it's the same kind of algorithm that he's using unconsciously. If I take a number like 3 and I perform an operation on it, like cubing it, then I get an output, 27, and it's the same pattern every time. So this idea of systemizing, and very strong systemizing in autistic people, might help explain why we have autistic artists, sometimes called savants, who can draw at a remarkable level because they're experimenting with ways of doing things. Drawing and motor skills can be systems too. So Nadia was documented in 1979 by the psychologist Lorna Self. She was autistic, had no language, but at 5 years old was drawing pictures like the one on the left. For comparison, I've put Leonardo da Vinci in the middle at age 55, and then a typical 8-year-old child's drawing. So you can see that there's a precocious understanding of how to represent objects accurately, probably by experimentation. So what's this kind of the scientific evidence that autistic people are strong at systemizing? Well, in this large population of 600,000 people, we gave them the systemizing quotient. It asks you how interested you are in different systems. And 36,000 autistic people took part. We found that autistic people report having much stronger interest in systems than people who are not autistic. We also found in that same large population that if you give a measure of autistic traits to the population, you get a bell curve. But if you separate the population into those who work in STEM, science, technology, engineering, or math, and those who do not, you find that those in STEM have a higher number of autistic traits than those who are not working in STEM. There seems to be this special connection between people whose minds show an aptitude in understanding systems and the number of autistic traits they have. This is a study which I quite like. I just found as I was preparing for today, because it's a test of pattern recognition, where the pattern in the middle is present in one of the displays on the left or the right. Some of you may have spotted it already. So it's present in the left-hand display, but not in the right. And people with on the autism spectrum are more accurate on that test. This is part of the IQ test. It's called the block design subtest, just wrapping up. That autistic people show their strongest performance on this test, where you take the blocks and you have to copy the pattern in the middle. Autistic people are just as fast if they see the unsegmented design as if it's pre-segmented as the one on the right, whereas non-autistic people benefit from it being pre-segmented. This is a test called the embedded figures test, where you have to find the cube as fast as you can in the overall design. And across a range of different studies, following a meta-analysis, people who have more autistic traits are faster and more accurate than people who have fewer autistic traits, and autistic people score at a higher level of accuracy and are faster on this test than are non-autistic people. This is a test of statistical learning, where you have to be able to predict the location of particular symbols, but again, there are rules that you can extract, and autistic people seem to be better than non-autistic people on this test. And just to make it real world, a study looking at autistic people working at airport security, where you have to look for patterns in real objects, which might be an anomaly, so anomaly detection, particularly where it could be a threatening object. People who have more autistic traits are faster and more accurate at spotting, in this case, the revolver in someone's bag, than people who have fewer autistic traits. So this led us to make a prediction that if autism is genetic and autism involves strong systemizing, perhaps we'd find higher rates of autism in people who work in places like Silicon Valley, which attract people who are good at understanding systems. Jim will probably be telling us about people who work at Google later on. Silicon Valley is a long way from Cambridge, so we looked at the Silicon Valley of the Netherlands and a particular city called Eindhoven, which has the Institute of Technology there, but it's also had the Philips factory there for over 100 years, attracting people who are good at systems thinking. And we found autism rates were more than twice as high in Eindhoven compared to two other Dutch cities, Haarlem and Utrecht, that were not cities that were enriched for people working in systems or technology. And just to delve into this more deeply, we then worked with the company 23andMe, the personal genomics company, to collect over 50,000 DNA samples and ask people to take the systemizing quotient, and discovered that systemizing, where you score on that bell curve, is partly genetic. And if you do an overlap analysis, where you look at the common genetic variants associated with systemizing and the common genetic variants associated with autism, you find a correlation about 0.2 or 0.3, suggesting that part of the genes that contribute to autism are also genes that contribute to talent and invention. I'm going to end by reminding you of this important word. I'm sure it's going to come up many times during the day. Neurodiversity, that the human population is made up of many different types of brains, differences, and differences should be respected and celebrated. We acknowledge that autism includes disability as well as difference, but as one very famous autistic person said, "I'm different, but I'm not less." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. We're going to have time for questions when we've heard all four speakers. And Simon started off with what was an amazing prediction that the word neurodiversity might come up. And it's going to come up right now because our next speaker is Professor Jenny Gibson. She's in the same department and team that I work in. She's Professor of Neurodiversity and Developmental Psychology. I had to check that because the words are a bit complicated for me in that run. And she's going to talk to us about neurodiversity and play. Jenny.
Okay, welcome everybody. As Paul says, I work at the Pedal Centre down at the Faculty of Education. Do visit us if you're heading that way. And I work there with my team, the Play and Communication Lab, who are sitting somewhere in the middle and contributed to some of this work. And I want to talk to you today about neurodiversity and play. That's what we study in my research group. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the concept of neurodiversity. So this concept, we hear a lot about it nowadays, and it has its origins in collective activism and advocacy in the 1990s, particularly on online communities. So if you're old like me, you might remember things like Billboard messaging service and so on. And the World Wide Web provided incredible technology for like-minded folk to connect who might not otherwise have been able to contact each other. And in the history of this, the InLive Forum around independent living was a community where autistic or people who felt they didn't quite fit could come together. And there's a very famous essay that came out from this movement from Jim Sinclair. It talks about autism as being something to celebrate and not as a tragedy. Not to be seen as a tragedy. So Sinclair talks about autism as a way of being, something that's pervasive and colours every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion and encounter, every aspect of existence. So Sinclair's insight here is that to be autistic is to be part of oneself, and it's not sort of some separable disease or othering undesirable condition. Judy Singer is also a well-known thinker in this area, and they talk about this. We're beginning to divide ourselves according to something new, differences in kinds of minds, swinging the nature-nurture pendulum back towards nature. So singers talking about being true to an authentic self in their autisticness. Now, I've been interested in researching play for quite a long time, and particularly using play in the diagnosis of autism in young children in my role as a speech and language therapist and psychologist. And I was very interested in what this neurodiversity lens could offer for our understanding of play. So here is a model of learning through play from a famous Lego Foundation white paper. And they talk about the characteristics of playful experiences, thinking about them particularly for learning and education. So Zosh and colleagues argue that play should be joyful, it should be fun, it should be engaging, it should really get your attention and interest. There's an element of social interactivity, and it has to be individually meaningful. And finally, play can be iterative as well. So learning through play experiences will display some, or generally all of these characteristics in different levels. So what happens when we put this kind of model together when we're thinking about autistic play? Well, historically, there has been quite a deficit focus when we're thinking about autistic play. When you look at the kinds of clinical reports that I might see, you would see words used in quite a pejorative way. So autistic play being characterised as rigid, lacking in imagination, repetitive, solitary, isolated, and even purposeless. And this feeds into these ideas of autism stereotypes for me. The image on the left as the thankfully now defunct logo of the National Autistic Society in the UK. And it presents autism as this kind of tragedy and this puzzle to be solved and in a kind of very othering way. Again, conjuring up images of someone isolated, odd, who needs to be fixed, and the problem is located in that autistic individual. There's also some evidence out there that contextual factors are very relevant for autistic play. So this was a few years back now, but this was a play provision at a primary school in the UK for an autistic child. And a school felt this was an appropriate environment. If you had to play and enjoy yourself in that space, I imagine you might look a bit repetitive, odd, and isolated too. So back to our research question. What might a neurodiversity-informed approach offer for our understanding of autistic play? I don't have much time today, so what I'm going to do is just present some insights that are coming from the research literature, from research that my team and others have carried out that speak to these different aspects of learning through play. And in that way, you can start to hear a diversity of voices represented. So on our actively engaging, we've got a quote here from an autistic adult who says, "I prefer a much more narrative focus to games. It's very much theatre of the mind," which is a phrase. It's about what you're seeing in your head and how you're seeing your character acting. So this idea that something that's playful for this autistic individual will engage them in a narrative. And I think this point about iteration speaks to Simon's point about systematizing. And one of my favorite quotations here is this healthy bit of hyperfocus. The idea that some playful activities can be repeated again and again and again, and you obtain depth and meaning through that sense of repetition. Some theories of play suggest that this capacity for iteration and spotting minor variations is really important as humans to help us manage and deal with uncertainties and find new patterns. But we don't want to miss out the joy of play, and ultimately play is enjoyable as a topic. It doesn't mean that it's not serious, but there's something about the depth and joy. And many autistic individuals tell us that the sensory aspect of play can be quite satisfying. It might be clicking your Rubik's Cube. It might be the sight and sound of a steam train that made me clap like a performing seal. Or there's the joy of hyperfocus, arriving at a similar state by deep concentration. So that pleasure in activities that are done for recreation and enjoyment. There's also this point that this autistic person makes quite deeply, I think, about the meaning that's created through play and like-minded community. So this person is talking about Dungeons and Dragons. It's a recent publication in Autism Journal around Dungeons and Dragons tabletop gaming. And this person talks about, in middle school, I was intensely bullied. I wanted, to go to the boarding school for mutants or, meet magic people or go through the wardrobe, all that stuff. It's just finding somewhere where you belong. So creating meaningful spaces for connection through play. And thinking back to those stereotypes we want to challenge, social interaction through the phenomenological research that we've been doing shows that social interaction can look different for autistic people, but be no less fulfilling. So this person says, for me, social play is I'm going to do my drawing here, you're going to sit next to me and do your drawing next to me. We might have a chat and look at each other's drawings. Another quotation that I think is good is this person saying, I seem to have better interactions with Dungeons and Dragons than with any other activity. Maybe that's why I do Dungeons and Dragons so well, because it's specifically a group game. And these quotations I've picked out because they might sometimes be picked out as those kind of socially awkward, socially odd, socially different things when viewed from a neurotypical perspective. But from the autistic perspective here, they're socially interactive and engaging. So these are the key takeaways. Autistic play can look different in young children, but we should move away from that deficit-focused framing and be more imaginative. Aspects of repetitive or iterative play can look like disengagement for some children, but actually our research shows us that these kinds of behaviours and engagement can have important functions for self-regulation. And as Simon said, thinking about strengths, differences and difficulties in balance can be really helpful to shift the narrative away from that deficit focus. So if you're working with children and young families affected by autism, I think bring them into the conversation about their play and friendships and find out what works for them.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Okay, so we're moving swiftly on and through. Our next speaker is Professor Imre Leader. He's here. I didn't get a chance to see him before we started. Great, thank you very much. He's Professor of Mathematics, pure mathematics, and has a long-standing interest in supporting autistic mathematicians, both in the UK maths team and studying at Cambridge. I'm really delighted to hear from you. Please come and take the stage.
I'll just be very, very brief, because I have no real proper engagement with autism and play. So I'm a mathematician in Cambridge, and I'm at Trinity College, and as many of you are probably aware, amongst mathematicians there is a high number of autistic students who vary very much on the spectrum between people who have mild autism. I don't have, quite have to... Oh, thank you. I don't know how I would define mild autism. What I mean is, if you were behind them in a supermarket queue, you wouldn't notice anything unusual about them. And then let's say for just this conversation, non-mild autism would be the kind of thing where if you were behind someone in a queue at a supermarket, you would tell that person has autistic traits. So something like this. We get a huge selection. Of course, a lot of the people doing maths are just completely unautistic, but a good number display some kind of autistic behaviour, and lots are quite heavily on the autistic spectrum. And with Simon, we've often looked at some of these people and in particular cases. Of course, it's hard to draw general conclusions, certainly in my case, because we have a small sample. We see about 40 students per year. So even over a 20-year stretch, that's only about 800 people. One of the things we find is that, first of all, autistic kids seem to be extremely good at maths in general. It obviously has to do with what James mentioned, the repetition, the pattern, the spotting patterns, which may not be that much to do with research maths, but have a lot to do with maths when people are growing up. So in primary school, in secondary school or high school, a lot of the mathematics is Well, it's interesting. It's what we researchers would dismiss as rote learning. So it's the kind of thing where in an exam, a maths exam, say for A-levels, a question you are asked will be exactly a question you've seen before, perhaps with different numbers. So if you're a diligent student, you'll know exactly what to do. There's no actual thinking involved. So in that sense, we are quite dismissive of it normally. However, from the point of view of a child learning the material, obviously the better you are at spotting patterns, the better. So we do find a lot, especially anecdotally talking with teachers, is that a particular mathematical technique, like say, how to solve a quadratic equation, or how to do this, or how to draw that, autistic children will need many fewer examples before they spot the general pattern. And we have lots of anecdotes, again, only anecdotal of course, where the teacher gives one example, just one, and the child already knows exactly what's going on and can repeat it 50 times. So in that sense, I suspect that may have a lot to do with how autistic children are drawn into mathematics. The idea of spotting patterns, learning how to repeat something, getting pleasure from repeating it and being good at that. Now when they get to university, it's often quite different. So the undergraduate maths in Cambridge, for example, is focused a lot on actual thinking. And what we find is that nearly all the autistic kids do transfer very, very well to that. So this is something I don't really have my own theory about why that should be the case. I can understand they'd be very good at school type maths where you learn something and repeat it. It's not obvious to me, although I'm sure Simon might have his own ideas, of why they're very good at undergraduate maths. We nearly always find that if there's someone who is heavily on the autistic spectrum and then doesn't do well at the maths, it's normally not because they're not good at the maths, but because there's some underlying personal issue. Perhaps they're scared to go to lectures, perhaps they don't like writing things down. And again, it's very hard to separate that side of things from the actual maths ability side of things. But we do find that apart from personal problems, the children who are high on the autistic spectrum are very, very good at maths. What's also interesting is that they fit in very, very well socially. So most of the autistic children, I'm not mentioning Jenny's horrible picture with the caged area, they've stood out at school as being the strange child in some version of the word strange. And suddenly when they get to Cambridge, they find they're in a group of many people who are, well, first of all, very tolerant of them. And that's because normally the math students and the science students generally, I don't want to say they're not good at social conventions. I don't mean they don't shower and so on, but I mean, well, that'll be a different story. But I mean, they're very, very, they accept everyone who will chat to them. There's nothing of the bullying that goes on in many schools, especially with young teenagers in Britain. There's none of that we see, certainly. So that's one side of it, they're more accepting. And also, they find they're with many other children who also exhibit types of autism, often on other very extreme cases. And it's incredibly common certainly amongst the math staff in my college, that an anxious parent is phoning up about their 16 or 17-year-old saying, I'd like them to come to Cambridge to do maths, but how will you cope? They have the following strange issues, the following strange behaviour. And we're always able to say, don't worry, we have much stranger children here. And it's always true. Of course, we don't use the words, we sanitise the word stranger, of course, but yeah, you know what I mean. So that's I think another way in which the children who are on the autistic spectrum seem to have a very nice time when they're studying maths. The same applies also for computer science, for physics, for all the STEM subjects. They do seem to fit in. Maths seems to attract a much higher proportion of the autistic children. I don't really have a theory about why that is. I can understand they're much more STEM happy than arts happy. It's not quite clear to me why they're so much keener on the maths, but they do seem to be. So they seem to do very well. They seem to fit in very well. And what's also interesting is that when they do maths, and they're good at it, what they're doing is very similar to what the non-autistic children do at maths. So if you look at how an autistic student has solved a maths problem, it's usually not the case, oh gosh, that's a very strange solution, that must be a very strange person, or oh, that solution betrays traits of autism. That really isn't the case. I mean, very rarely we do see examples where a child with autism wants to write down the final answer, but not how they got there. So that we do see, and they will have had a process of getting there. they may be very used from high school or even before just writing that number at the end. And of course that works for some things, not for other things, so we have to get them to unlearn that a bit. But apart from that aspect, which is really just to how you write it down, apart from that aspect, I think in our experience, the autistic children who do the maths, meaning, I don't mean boring problems, I mean interesting problems you have to think. So problems where when you read the question, your mental process isn't, oh sure, I can do that, but help, how do I start? So typically say in Cambridge Maths, on the homework sheets, the first few questions are easy and the last few questions are like this, that you look at them and you think, help, I can't touch this. And the autistic kids do seem, when they do those, to be doing them in the exact same way that everyone else is doing them. So it's very interesting. Again, I have no theory about why this is, but it's quite noticeable. You don't find that on a particular hard question, you find that the non-autistic kids do it this way, and autistic kids tend to do it that way. It seems to be more about just enjoying the actual maths and finding their ways of thinking about the problem. But I can't see a particular autistic thing there. So I think that's quite interesting. The last thing I'll mention is that in terms of play, that we have obviously a lot of autistic kids are very good at things like chess, bridge, and so on. There are also board game groups in Cambridge. Again, this is purely, of course, it's anecdotal rather than a small sample, but a lot of the autistic kids go to the board game groups and they enjoy them a lot. And this is obviously a combination we heard from the previous speakers. It must be partly that you are part of a group, and that's always nice, and partly also you're doing a rules-based thing where it's important to spot patterns and so on. And again, purely anecdotally, when the kids with high on autistic spectrum do go to the board game groups, it is indeed anecdotally the case that they immerse themselves 100% in the game. So they're completely focused on the game. Again, it's hard to know because, as you might guess in Cambridge, most of the board game players are mathematician type people. So it's hard to know if this business of being happy in a group is because there's a common theme and there is the purpose, which is what Jenny was talking about, which probably is the case. But it could also be, from our limited sample, that maybe it's just because they're used to dealing with other mathematicians and therefore they're happy in the company of the other mathematicians, and therefore the board game group is a winner to them because it's full of mathematicians as well. So there's a lot of interesting research to do there, which will be very interesting to do. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Imre. Oh, it's got me thinking about my board game playing and my family's board game playing. Our last speaker for this session, I'm really delighted to welcome Jim Hogan, who's joining us from Google, and we'll be speaking about research into autism and the world of business. Thank you very much, Jim.
Or something close.
Or something close. Okay, that sounds good.
It's very dangerous to have a stack of Rubik's Cubes in front of me. So, they all need to be scrambled and solved for. So 50 years ago, a little bit more than 50 years ago now, my parents stood in front of a doctor, and that doctor said, he's going to be a burden to you for the rest of your lives. At the time that I was diagnosed, it was anything other than full institutionalization was totally unconventional. I was nonverbal, and all I did was sit on the floor and flip through any book that I could reach on the bookshelves when I was younger. One day my dad looked at me and he said, blue whale. And I walked over to the encyclopedias and I took the W off and I opened it up to blue whale. And at that time in that encyclopedia book, the blue whale was extinct. But like the doctor who said I would never amount to anything, because now I'm Chief Innovation Evangelist at Google Cloud, thank you very much. The blue whale was listed in that encyclopedia as extinct. But reality said that about 30 years after that, I was actually out fishing off the coast of Mexico. I saw a blue whale with my own eyes. Of course, everybody knew they weren't extinct at that time, but people often get it wrong. And so, I'm here to say that when I was growing up, I was the puzzle. Am I jacked up? Yeah, sorry. He's got his hand in my pocket. Usually I have to. go to the bar or pay somebody have a drink or something. Sorry. He's been messing with this microphone all day, so we can just leave it out now I'm here. Because I think it's my pocket. I have a lot of electromagnetic engineering, our systems going through my body. So basically, I lost my train of thought. Unbelievable. He's autistic public speaker. So that's really what I do for a living now at Google. Is I'm an evangelist, which means that when I was told to be an evangelist on January 1st, 1983, there was a man named Vince Cerf that flipped the switch on what is today's modern internet. He invented TCP/IP, and he works at Google too, and he is my chief mentor, and he is our chief internet evangelist. And so he taught me back in when he did that in 1983, there was only about 400 computers connected to the internet at that time, and now there's hundreds of billions of devices connected to the internet every day. There's way more devices than humans, which has always been very astonishing to me. So, but I realized as I was growing up, in 1983, I sold my first piece of commercial software then. And I didn't learn to code because I had great pattern recognition or I was seeking out the patterns in the world. It turned out that I was the puzzle that the world needed to solve for. I did not want to be a burden to my parents. My dad was a high school principal. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We were not a rich family. We didn't have great resources. It was really up to me to take this skill that I learned and go out to the world and say, world, here I am. I can make my own living. And so basically, in 1983, I sold my first piece of software when I was still in high school, and never looked back from there. So, I've always understood the coding and the patterns that exist in actually solving for a particular problem. But when Simon showed the slide of the IQ test and the blocks and things, it brought back terrible nightmares for me because everybody wanted to test me when I was younger. Seemed like I was smart. I could memorize, anything that you gave me, I could memorize and repeat it back to you. Okay, he hates the microphone. He just put another one in front of me. So basically, I kind of applied that same thing to, first of all, I'm going to need to survive and pay the bills. So I better learn a skill. So the coding turned out to be that. While at the same time, I didn't let the stereotypes of being autistic kind of keep me down. Of course, I'm socially awkward. I am terrible with navigation. I'll be in a building and I get completely lost. So when I'm asking people for precise information about where I'm supposed to be today, it's all great. I just knew I was going to be okay because my friend at Google, Emmanuel Pacheco, is here. And the reason that I brought up the IQ testing is that I used to be poked and prodded, and we want to understand his IQ. And if you look at my IQ from a perspective of reading and retention and things like that, it's super, super, super high. But when you put the blocks in front of me and said make a pattern or any type of anything, no bueno. That means no good in my country. Oh, actually, I live in Australia now, so I don't know what it means. But anyway, so one day I get pinged on LinkedIn by my coworker Emmanuel, and he just said right straight out that he's going to teach me how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And I was like, no, the physical problem solving, it's bringing back terrible memories. I can't do that. It's not something I can do. People have been trying to ask me to solve physical problems for my entire life, and I can't do it. And I refuse to try. And he's like, no, trust me. Give me the weekend. You're looking at the problem all wrong. From my perspective, what you need to look at is you need to see the cube as a computer problem, and I'm going to teach you the algorithms that you need to solve it. So 2 days later, I was solving, and I became Emmanuel's most famous solver. He was at Google. We have the Cube Club, and I became honorary vice president to recruit more members. So, because if Jim Hogan can do it, anyone can do it. So, and I'm a little bit sporadic because I'm trying to be quick, but I just wanted to give you my definition of neurodiversity as an autistic individual. So, I'm doing my doctorate at Griffith University in Australia. I came all the way from Australia yesterday. And so I look a little bit, somewhat unironed because I started ironing my shirt and it gave me one of those big iron stains, and I'm like, I'm not doing the same thing to my beautiful, beautiful jacket. So ostentatious liner and all. But anyway, if I look out at this crowd, what I see are a lot of physical distinctions. I see eye shape and eye color and hair color and ear shape and skin tone, and all of those things are beautiful. But what I don't see is how you all perceive the world around you. And it's that perception and that unique way that you perceive the world around you. That's what neurodiversity is. Neurodiversity is not an othering activity. We don't say those neurodiverse people over there. Thank God there's nobody there. I did that during my TED talk, and there's like a group of people there. I'm like, no, I wasn't othering. So neurodiversity is never an othering activity where we say those neurodiverse people over there. Neurodiversity, just like diversity, is everyone, and it's beautiful because nobody perceives the world around them the same way. Now, I was born autistic. People would say that I perceive the world around me in a very unique fashion, but I make a good living, so nobody really looks at the fact I'm sitting in Emirates first class as an autistic individual or anything like that. Yes, I spent a lot of Amex points. When Emmanuel said, you're coming to London, I was like, woo, Emirates Platinum. So, but I just wanted everybody to understand how I define neurodiversity and that you should never, ever use that as an othering activity or say those neurodiverse people over there. Because I consider myself neurodistinct. And you'll hear a lot of people use the term neurodivergent, which I don't use, because I would never walk up to like Emmanuel on the street and say, Emmanuel, you look very physically divergent to me. Just doesn't seems like I'd get hit for saying something like that. So just because we're coming out with new items or new things that are impacting humanity doesn't mean we like reinvent language. So I use the term distinct because it's the same way I would describe somebody as physically distinct. So, but anyway, that's my sporadic talk. I'm talking again at 1, so feel free to come back, I think. So sorry about the microphone. Hello. And this is still attached to me. And if I walk away, I'm going to make all kinds of problems happen. So I'm just going to do this and before I do that. So, but thank you very much for listening. And I look forward to spending some time with you all a little bit later. Thank you.
I'll invite all the speakers to come up to the front just for a few moments as an opportunity for questions from the audience. We only have a few minutes, but we have opportunity for questions if anyone would like to ask a question of any of our speakers or of all of them.
Can I ask? It was good. I enjoyed the speech. It was lovely, and that is it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. Derek, it's very nice to see you again.
Good to see you, Simon, yes.
And we're looking forward to hearing you play later.
We are looking forward to hearing you play later.
Thank you. Got 2 questions. Go there first and then first.
You first?
Yeah, you first.
Okay,
Sorry,
yeah.
it's not very clear distinction, is it, from here?
It's just very obvious from the lineup here that there's one woman, Professor Gibson, sitting in the lineup. I wonder if you could talk a bit about gender balance within neurodiverse or neurodistinct communities.
Do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, okay. So certainly going, back historically, autism has been seen as a very male phenomenon, and more recently, more women are being diagnosed with autism, and there's a recognition that symptoms might present differently in autistic girls and women compared to men. So I think the short answer to this is we've got a lot of catching up to do to really understand neurodivergence as it presents in girls and women and people of non-binary and other genders as well. And that journey feels like it's just beginning.
Anyone else like to join in that? I'll just add that amongst our math students, of course, math students are mainly very, very male anyway, but amongst the women, we certainly do have autistic behaviour, and including ones who've been extremely autistic. And again, they function somehow in a standard autistic way. We couldn't see a male-female distinction in the way that they act. And of course, that's only a very small data set.
I see Paul's walking down, so I'm going to make time for one more question and then we'll move on to the next section.
So firstly, the talk about autism in mathematics as a mathematician was very felt like I was being sort of portraited. But for Simon, it was just a, sort of a question of interest about your concept of synthesizing. It was sort of where you seem to suggest that humans might be the only creatures, animals that can perform this task in its entirety. And I was wondering if I had a pet and I could teach that pet a trick, that seemed like they might be performing somewhere. If my owner is giving me a treat or hiding it, then it must be here. Where would you suggest that distinction lay for humans? Is it perhaps in the experimenting phase? I just wonder what your thoughts were.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'll try and keep it brief. But in my book, I contrast two different ways of learning, if you like. So one is associative learning, where you just associate two things. And most animals do that, especially if there's a reward involved, then you kind of form an association and often repeat it. Systemizing, the if and then pattern recognition, seems to be underlying invention, and it allows generative invention. That once you can play with that algorithm, you can generate lots of new patterns. And that's not something that we see very much outside of human animals. Thank you.
Simon's going to have to go on first. Simon, two of our have to go because they have an 11 o'clock deadline, I'm afraid. So we'll have big questions just for two of our speakers, I'm afraid, just for the last 5 minutes. Let's go to the front line.
The question about neurodiversity, and again, traits of neurodiversity in Jim, and also any other comments about, again, like I have ADHD and I'm a sales rep, and most sales reps have ADHD if you take a look at traits of what makes them a really good salesperson. So I'd ask Jim, neurodiversity and kind of the differences of categorization of somebody you're neurodiverse, maybe understanding how you feel when somebody calls you neurodiverse. Like, I'm curious about how do you prefer to be interacted with, or how do people treat you differently than anybody else?
Yeah, I basically teach people that neurodiverse is everyone. Neurodistinct are people that are, artistic, ADHD, dyspraxic, dyslexia, acquired brain injuries, and then neurotypical is everyone else. And neurotypicals make up about 80% of the population. So when you talk about diversity of thought, there isn't very much, because there's a huge majority of people that think a certain way and are governed by societal norms that fall outside of what would be called neurodistinct behavior sometimes. So, examples are, when you're interviewing for a job, or don't fidget, look me in the eye, talk clearly, don't meander around your thought. Some traits that neurodistinct people have actually disqualifies them from a normal interview process. And that's why there's the 85% of college-educated individuals who are autistic are unemployed. And many people think unemployable. So when somebody says that I'm neurodistinct, I usually take it as a compliment, just because I'm a very positive person. And but you do have to understand that I've been dealing with being autistic is a disability. Like I take medication. I am a the medical system has made me capable of interacting in the world, which is often way too cruel. So when I basically tell people that being autistic, sometimes it's no picnic, but life is, I always try to stay positive and say life is pretty darn good. So if you want to call me neurodistinct, I would just say thank you. So that's my normal thing. And that was not a planned question. We didn't fly together or anything. He lives completely separate.
Okay, we'll take questions from the third row.
Another question, Jim. So, Jim, you said you didn't have much in the way of support growing up. What would you have liked to have had by way of support? You've been very successful, so what might have made a difference to that? And what do you think needs to be available for autistic kids today?
Well, my dad was high school principal, and his desire to teach was only topped by my desire to learn. So I had great support when it came from my dad. My mom kind of had a shame about my diagnosis, like that it was somehow her fault, that we dealt with for most of my life. When my father passed away in 1998, he was my best friend, and I had an emptiness, in my life, that because I no longer had that support system of somebody who truly believed in me. And it took me a long time to kind of get my mom there, but my dad supported me, like one time, and this is part of my TED talk. Jim Hogan TEDx, it's out there. I'm not the actor one, I'm the Googler one. So there's an actor one, I never watched it, not interested. But anyway, but I mentioned the fact that like one time I took the telephone apart, because that's what I used to do when I was a kid. If they left me alone with the toaster would be gone. So all the small appliances in my house were hidden and up really high. And they tried to put the phone really high on the wall because they could see me sitting on the floor watching my mother talk to Auntie Dell for like an hour at a time. And I'm like, not only like, what are they talking about and why do you have so much to say? But I needed to know how that phone worked. And so I got up there, got it off the wall, took it apart, ripped all the wires out of the wall, kind of realized that if I pulled this wire, you could see the black wire outside was connected to a pole. Just when I was about to scale the pole, my dad caught me and was like, and instead of walking in with like a gasp, he walked in and just said, would you like to know how that works? And he did his best to try to teach me how the telephone works and how telecommunications works. He bought me the Lineman's and Cableman's Guide, which is still the Bible of the telecommunications industry, is how to actually put these systems and technology together. So here I am, like a non-verbal, or I call it non-verbal, but I had my own non-spoken language. But he's basically bought me this shiny green book, and I was reading it, and and I actually, one of my first big innovations were in telecommunications. So I understood it intrinsically, and but that's how I got supported. I didn't get I was in trouble with my mom for breaking the telephone because she wanted to talk to Auntie Dell, and I broke it. So, but basically, that was the kind of support that I got, was not the like, oh my God, why are you doing that gasp support? So, but anyway.
Thank you very much.
The person in the second row who had a question is gone now, so that question isn't in queue anymore.
Okay, well, we're probably going to stop. Go on, Paul. Are you going to ask a question, or?
Yeah, I was going to ask
Go on then. You're allowed to.
It's for Imre. So at Cambridge, we've got quite a special education system involving lectures and supervisions and then very high-stake exams. If you were to design it now, is that how you design the education system for autistic students?
That's a very interesting question. I suppose, well, so those who don't know, the Cambridge system is you go to say for maths, you go to lectures, you write down the notes. The lectures are hard enough, you don't understand them in real time probably. You go over your notes carefully at home, then you do the homework sheets, which the lecturer gives out, and then the key thing is supervisions. So once a week, you and your partner go, two of you, to one of us for a very intense chat where we look at the work you've done, talk about material, extensions, ways through problems and so on. Now in that sense, my boring cop-out answer is I wouldn't change that at all, because the supervision-based system basically says everything's personalised to the two students. So if they're weak, you can go more slowly. If they're good, you can give them harder problems and so on. That works very well with autistic students as well. So for example, we've never ever had to say, let's pair those two autistic people together. So normally once you're in the context of supervision, even a very autistic student and a completely unautistic student are absolutely fine together, because they're there focusing on the maths. So that side of things, which is the main side, I wouldn't change at all. In terms of lectures, I think lectures work for most people. Of course, they're especially good for autistic kids who offer quicker understanding in real time. So actually linking back to the question about women autistic people, we had about 10 years ago a brilliant autistic girl who would sit in the front row of the lecture, and would always correct the lecturer. So if she said that plus should be a minus, she'd always be right. And on one famous occasion, my colleague Jan Saxel had some kind of blackboard blindness, and he didn't know what to do next. He'd lost track, and he turned to the front row and said, "Rebecca, help me." And she told him what to say, and she saved the lecture. So I think in that sense, I'm not saying I can't think of an improvement, but it seems to work very well for the autistic kids as well at the moment, especially the supervision system.
Okay, I'm looking at Paul to see what time do you want to go up. We'll have one more question and then we'll for a break for coffee.
Okay, I was just going to give a slightly different perspective. So my son is an alumni from Cambridge as well, and he didn't have a good time. I'll tell you straight away. He's autistic, and one of the struggles that he had is that he wanted to do microbiology. He wanted to do maths and microbiology. He was very clear when he came here, despite his parents really trying to get him to just do 3 A levels. He had to do 5, but he was very clear that this is what he wanted to do. And so when he came to the system, it was less about the sort of tutorial time, and less about the exams. That was just he could do that. But when you come here and you're doing natural sciences, you're actually you're brought into all these different departments, and there is no sort of overriding body that helps you organise that. And for him, who was at Girton as well, it was actually quite difficult to process and get to those different places. And I think that sometimes when a university like this is attracting certain types of people, I think you need to look as much positive as also the things that can be changed, and perhaps recognising that for some people to be in 4 or 5 different locations on a given day, week in, week out, actually is really tough. So I would just put a slightly sort of different perspective to life for an autistic child in Cambridge, and not all of the experiences have been positive.
Can I answer? So that's very interesting. So I think I was talking from a maths perspective, where in some sense these problems don't arise, that everyone goes to one place every day for lectures, and that's just that. So in some sense, perhaps I was talking from perhaps the maths system is accidentally, not deliberately, optimised for autistic people, but it certainly could be the case that if I think that natural science or some of the other things like where you do history and politics and social science together, especially in your first year, it could well be the case that you're right, that having to be in lots of different places will affect everyone, but will affect autistic people much, much more. So I'm sure you're right on that.
But I do agree with you that the tutorial system and that checking in on a regular basis, and something you wouldn't have perceived at most other universities, was definitely a very positive thing. And I think that he really enjoyed. Yeah.
Thank you for that reflection, and I want to thank our speakers. 2 of them disappeared, but thank our speakers.
I want to take a selfie with everybody, so.
Okay.
Just ignore my stand-up.
Okay.
I have my phone.
I want to just take a moment to thank all of the speakers in the traditional way, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much.
First of all, we have Max Park, who's going to be demonstrating, who's quite quick at the Rubik's Cube. So to introduce Max, we've got his father, Schwan.
Oh, okay. Hello, I am Schwan Park. I am father to Max, and I'm here to share with you just really briefly his story. Just as quick as I can kind of go through it without getting into too much details. Erno Rubik's in his book says, he has a quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think it says something like, the Rubik's Cube, we don't solve the Rubik's Cube solves us. We really feel like that's a mantra to our life. And more so, not really so much for Max, but for me and his mom, Mickey, it solved us. It helped us to help Max. Every time we see Erno Rubik, we just can't help but think, I wonder if he understands that this thing that he made has changed people's lives. And it's dramatically changed Max's life. But there's so many other speedcubers in this world that it has changed their lives. Because I think we talked a little bit about people on the spectrum are a little bit more introverted, precocious, shy. But the Rubik's Cube has helped them to find a community of people that they instinctively know, as soon as they see them do this, they know that they're on the same wavelength, like they think alike. They find their tribe of people. And when they do find their tribe of people, magical things happen. But I guess the one short story I wanted to say was, in respects to the cube solving us, is that when Max first started showing an interest in the cube, his mom thought, well, why don't we see, because at that time we're sitting there constantly looking for social environments to try to help Max get into, to try to, just practice socializing. And it's a little bit more difficult for some of us. So she found a Rubik's Cube competition. And when we went there, we found that immediately the type of people that go to the Rubik's Cube competitions are very similar. They're very introverted, they're very precocious, they're very diligent about patterns and solutions and sharing. So, but the magical thing that happened that day, the first day we went, was he started pointing. Now, as some of you may or may not know, pointing is a hallmark for kids with autism to not naturally have. We were on the airplane on the way here. We saw this little child that was probably about a year and a half, and he kept on pointing and all that, and we can tell they were communicating. And so that didn't exist. So, like with most families that get into autism, we got into therapy, and one of the things we worked on was pointing and look at me and all that. And then when we went to the cube competition, he started pointing. Never saw that before. And he said, look, there's this person and this person, all the people he saw on the internet. And then we thought to ourselves, wait a second, he knows how to point. He just had nothing to tell us, So it dawned on us that, oh, okay, so the secret is not that he can't point. He just didn't have anything to say until now. And so that kind of let us know that, it's really important to find out what, people like my son Max, and what we learned especially for Max is we switched our therapy to trying to find all the things that motivated him. And we try to really focus in on that. And sometimes it's throwing spaghetti on the wall. You're just trying a bunch of stuff. And thank goodness for my wife, Mickey, who is very good at trying things that I would normally poo-poo the idea. She would be like, let's try it. And the cubing competition, had I had my way, we wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have had the life that he has now. So anyway, that's the short story that I have. I just wanted to share that with you. But for right now, we're here with Max, and Max is very good at the Rubik's Cube. I don't know if some of you have seen it, but he has the world record right now. He solved the cube in 3.13 seconds. And he was profiled on Google as one of the top videos of that year. And so everybody knows him. I went to the bank the other day and I said, somehow the cube came up and I said, oh, did you see the video, 3.13? And he said, yeah, I saw that. Did you see it? And I said, yeah, I saw that. I don't know, for some reason I didn't tell him it was my son. I don't know why, because I don't know, it just seems weird. It's like, I felt like I would be like, I don't know, like making fun of him or something. I don't know, it's just like, oh yeah, wasn't that great and all that. So it's funny because everybody knows that. Everybody has seen that video, everybody knows it, and we think it's wonderful. But anyway, Max is, he gets stopped and has pictures taken. So he understands all the notoriety he gets. But anyway, for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to have him, you've already seen him solve a little bit, but we thought, here, Max, can we have somebody scramble it? Okay. Would somebody like to scramble it? Just mix it up as much as you can.
I'll never be able to figure it out.
Okay.
Okay, I'm joking. I'm joking. This is really nice. Okay, I think that's good. Yeah, he'll never figure it out.
Okay. All right, you ready, Max? All right. You want a countdown? Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. So, with the cube, anybody else? One more time? Okay.
This is not a fast one, but you can solve that.
Okay, one more, Max, okay? There you go. I'll give you a countdown, okay? Go ahead and take a look. I'll start the countdown. 3, 2, 1, go. So the one last thing I will say is we had the pleasure to speak with Professor Simon Baron-Cohen in his book, Pattern Seekers. They do talk about Max and about pattern seeking. And when I read the book, it was very on the mark what he was saying, that how Max thinks and learns. He sees the patterns really quick. Ever since he was a little kid, he would notice two things. He noticed patterns very, very quickly, and also the other thing is he had a very high awareness for spatial dimensions. Like when we were at the mall, he would run up to like a cardboard cutout of like Iron Man and would want to see what's behind it and have a really good interest in spatialness of that. And that with the Rubik's Cube, I thought it ended up becoming like the perfect fit for him. He finds a lot of comfort in doing the cube. And so, yeah, that's our story. And I guess that's it.